The Tennessee coaching search. What is the very latest here? You know what? I don't think a lot of people know, and that's okay. In fact, that's a really good thing. What if I told you a lack of information is a good thing if you're a Tennessee fan? Here's how I wanted to start this, though. In order to make it make sense, you need to understand the anatomy of a modern day coaching search, which is a different thing altogether than a coaching search was 15 years ago. To understand why the information seems so scarce, you have to understand how the athletic director position has evolved. They just hired a new one in Knoxville. His name is Danny White. He came from UCF, University of Central Florida, and we talked about him a little bit the other night. The risk reward when it comes to reporting for, let's say, local beat writers, I don't think has ever been more lopsided. It's all risk. It is very little reward. And those guys and girls out there right now they are sweating bullets every time they get a name, every time they get a little piece of information. Should I go with it? Should I keep it to myself? And you may wonder, why is that? Why wouldn't you go with information? Especially if it comes from what you deem as a reputable source. Here's why. So the old school approach, so think about hiring not a head coach, but an athletic director. That's where we need to start. In the old school, what would you do? If you were in a major program, well, you'd probably go hire a former coach, or at the very least, a former noteworthy player, someone who has been associated with the football program, because football, at the end of the day, it drives the bus for all the other lower revenue generating sports. And so you'd go get maybe a former coach. He knows football, therefore he knows how to handle a football hire. And if you're going to make a new football hire, it's going to be the athletic director and maybe a small circle of folks around him, but it's going to be the AD leading the search. Information, as a result, filters through the same channels in the football complex as normal news would, as normal information would. And so picture yourself being a Tennessee beat writer. Picture yourself working for GoVols247.com, and you cover the team on a day-to-day basis, and you have your established network of sources. And when it comes to depth chart, when it comes to getting information from closed practices, when it comes to roster moves, who's going to transfer, the same sources that you would go to or you would utilize to get those pieces of information, you could freely utilize to get information on a coaching search. Why? Because the coaching search is happening internal to the football program. Well, that was the old school way, and it worked for a long time. Here's the new school approach. Here's why it becomes so treacherous for local beat writers to cover coaching searches. The new school in hiring an athletic director is there's an emphasis on finding a CEO type who's an excellent fundraiser and who has got upper management written all over him. In other words, someone you would trust in a boardroom to run a major company, because that's what a football program is. And really, you could argue it always has been, but that's how every major football program is viewed these days. When Danny White just got hired at Tennessee, what is the stat I gave you the other night? It wasn't about the combined records of his football coaches that he's hired, although that's impressive. It was about revenue generation. Danny White, over the last fiscal year, had generated 4 times more money than had been generated 4 years prior at Central Florida. So year over year, 4 years after 2016, 15, 16, that fiscal year, so the 19, 20, that range, they generated just over $35 million, which was, again, 4 times what they had generated 4 years prior. That's getting it done. That gets the attention of everyone. And by the way, this happens without fail. Normally I don't mention it, but it just popped in my head. So the other night, I was talking about that stat, and I was talking about what Danny White did in a fiscal year, okay, which anyone who has gotten themselves past third grade reading level understands is different than the word physical. Well, I thought that it was so widely understood that that was the case, I would joke around with you and say fiscal, or as my friends call it, physical year. Well, there's always one person who probably didn't make it past third grade, but who understands how to log on to the internet, who is going to play hero in the comment section on YouTube. So someone actually thought I was serious when I said that, and they pulled out that e-sword and they got cut with it. I'll just leave it at that. They got cut with it. So breaking news, we here at Late Kick do indeed understand the difference between fiscal and physical. The only time I've been called out in the last month where I had to just cower in shame is, I'm going to be honest with you, I did not know the difference between the word jibe, J-I-B-E, and jive. I've just been saying that doesn't jive with my whole life. And I got called out the other night, and they were right and I was wrong, and I gave myself 50 self-lashes for punishment. So we move on now. That's been taken care of. But in the new school approach, consider what hiring an athletic director with that background means. It's happening right now at Tennessee. When you bring in a guy who's more of a fundraising CEO type, Danny White hasn't been a head coach. Danny White wasn't a former All-American player who understands the entire landscape of the game, but Danny White is the proper hire for CEO. Well, what is the first thing he did? He came in and announced that they were hiring a search firm. And so what does a search firm mean? Well, a search firm, just like happened at Auburn about a month ago, means that you're taking what is normally inside the hands of people in the football operations department and you're outsourcing it. Well, guess what that means for someone covering a coaching search? Guess what that means for you as a fan? You can't rely on your normal sources of information, at least if you're trying to get legitimate information. And so the search firm handles the hiring process and the interview process. That interview process in turn, especially right now, takes place over Zoom, or a lot of people have figured out how to hide their tail numbers on their planes, and they know not to fly to Louisville if they're going to interview Bobby Petrino once upon a time. You fly to some remote clandestine location in the middle of nowhere and you mutually agree to meet, let's say in Springfield, Missouri. That's how you do it. Small circle on the university side. There is a very small circle that will ever at one given point in time be aware of what's going on in a coaching search. Only place you can get information as a result usually are agents. And agents are notorious for misleading you because an agent does not have their relationship with you at the forefront of their motivation. They have their relationship with their client at the forefront of their motivation. A lot of times you're being intentionally fed false information because they're trying to get their guy raises, they're trying to get him extensions and whatnot. Now I say all that to say this, that's not a bad thing. That's a very good thing because by default, if that's what's happening, if that's how Tennessee is operating their coaching search, well then that means a lot of folks who have been involved in the past aren't involved in the coaching search. So where is the search? Well, I'm focused, to be honest with you, a whole lot more on the timeline than the names themselves because, again, let's back up. If that's the way the coaching search is being operated, we don't have a legitimate list of names. We have little tidbits here and there. You know, you'll see a tweet, so-and-so is being vetted for the job. So-and-so, it's his job if he wants it. That stuff may end up being reality. It may not. I'm just telling you from my end, I don't view any of it as credible because I know the sourcing could be someone who has an ulterior motive other than just keeping the Tennessee public and college football public informed on where the Vols head coaching search is. So I'm focused on timeline. And that's where you can get more legitimate information. You know, someone close to Danny White's circle or that search firm circle, they will be completely hesitant in ever giving you legitimate information. But here's where they could be somewhat forthcoming. Giving you a loose timetable, letting a loose timetable leak out. There's no harm in that. You know, if they're planning on making a hire by Wednesday, there's no harm in them leaking out that, hey, we plan on having something in the next 72 hours or so, in the next few days or so. There's no harm in that. That may be legitimate. Now, that I have heard from a number of people, and that I do believe to be the case. The timeline's important because that totally flies in the face of what the initial assumption was for me. I got to admit that, for me and a lot of other people too. And that was, hey, Kevin Steele's probably going to be the coach here for a while, going to be the interim coach here for a while, going to be really hard to go get someone. Well, some people initially thought that about the AD search too, and they basically snapped their fingers and snagged Danny White out of UCF. I don't even know if he had time to pack his bags before he got to Tennessee. And so now it looks like they're trying to hire the coaching search in the same way. Now here's the awareness. Tennessee is aware. I mean, they're keenly aware. No one understands the potential pitfalls and snags around their program and the branding and the current reputation more than Tennessee themselves. And so the money they've committed to this search and this entire endeavor of overturning this football program and really athletic department, it speaks to their awareness of their limitations right now. Tennessee, tell you what it reminds me of, one of my favorite movies is Tombstone. And you watch Wyatt Earp, and he's out of the law game, and he's moving to Tombstone, wants to settle down, just wants to operate a nice, good faith business out there. Depending on your definition of faith. But listen, he's done, man. No more killing, no more chasing folks through the desert. Well, all of a sudden, the status quo changed. And so too did Wyatt Earp's attitude, the rest of the movie. I don't want to spoil it for you. It's only been out about 30 years. I don't want to spoil it for you if you haven't seen it already. Well, that's how Tennessee's kind of operating right now. Yeah, we know this, and yeah, we know that, and we know what kind of rebuild it is. But do you see this sack over here? Not sack. That's the wrong usage of word right now. Do you see this briefcase over here? It's full of money, a lot more than you get paid right now, a lot more than you'll probably make over the next 2 years. We're giving you a multiple year guarantee. We're going to load it up with incentives. This is a commitment from us to you. We need a commitment from you to us. Now, this search has the makings of a stunner because of those two reasons. Number one, very secretive. Not a lot of people in the loop, and that's good. Number two, they're willing to overpay and they're not bashful about it. And when you have those two elements in place, you have all the makings of this long list of widely reported candidates, and then you wake up one morning and you refresh Twitter at 8:28 a.m. and there's breaking news from like 4 different outlets, so-and-so set to be hired as Tennessee head coach, and you go, what? Number one, I had not heard his name once. Maybe my buddy and I mentioned him in passing at the water cooler the other day, but I never really thought he was a serious candidate. And that's the way this could go down. I don't even have a list of names. We all have the list. We've seen the list out there. But I'll tell you, I think it may come out of nowhere. There's one name that wouldn't quite be out of nowhere. I've seen some mention of his name on the fringes. The one I have thrown out with some buddies, and I'll just put it out there now, was James Franklin. James Franklin's a guy I'd go after. I know some of you in Tennessee don't like him because of his track record and where he's been previously. I'd go after James Franklin. James Franklin, number one, I think has learned about the limitations of recruiting at Penn State, and what he could do at Tennessee is a lot greater than what he could do at Penn State in terms of recruiting. Number two, you know what would interest me? What would interest me is the energy I would get with him, the ability to get him closer to his family, which I think they live in Florida maybe. And number three, and here's the most important part, when he went to Penn State, things were not well. When he went to Penn State, they were in the midst of trying to rebuild their image, repair their program. And so even if that is the case at Tennessee, you'd have a premier name. He matters coast to coast. He has a proven track record. And he's dealt with those kind of problems internally before. He's weathered that kind of storm. And so I wouldn't have any doubt about his willingness to take on that kind of challenge. I don't know if he's interested. I have no clue about that. I'm not floating his name out as me knowing something. I'm saying if I were part of this search firm, he would meet my requirements. Maybe my requirements differ from that of Tennessee. So that's where we think the Tennessee coaching search is right now. Hopefully we have more information sooner rather than later. I really think by the next time we have a show, which is on Thursday night, Tennessee will have a head coach in place.